Welcome to Marketplace Tech Bytes, our weekly review of some of the biggest stories making headlines across the industry. I'm Kimberly Adams. This week, TikTok prepares for a U.S. shutdown. Biden signs an executive order to bolster AI data center development. Meta's CEO urged Trump to intervene on EU fines on tech firms. For these headlines and more, I'm joined by our regular contributor, Maria Curie from Axios, for her take on these stories. Welcome, Maria.
Hey, thanks for having me.
As always, we are going to start with our bite of the week, our idea of what number really mattered when it came to tech this week. Maria, what's your number?
My number is $1 million. That is how much these tech giants are donating to Trump's inaugural fund.
And why is that such an important number?
You know, a lot of these companies, Google, Meta, Amazon, have donated to previous presidents. But this is really important because I think, number one, it's a lot more than we've seen in the past. And secondly, it might curry favor with an incoming administration whose decisions are going to impact all sorts of policies that could directly impact these companies.
Let's move on to our headlines of the week. The big one, TikTok is preparing for a U.S. shutdown. Earlier this week, it was reported by The Information that TikTok is planning to completely shut down its app in the U.S. this Sunday, prompting those who open the app to direct them to a website where they can read more about the platform's ban. And according to that reporting, TikTok is going to allow American users to download their data. And if that ban is overturned down the road, American users will be granted access to it immediately. Now, Maria, what do we make of this? I mean, it still feels like a lot of these users are in limbo, but the app's leaders are deciding just to pull the plug. What have you heard about this?
I think the important thing to note with this is that the law itself does not require TikTok to take any of these actions. What the law says is that unless TikTok finds a new parent company that does not have ties to China in the way that ByteDance does, that the app stores, Google, Apple, that these companies will simply have to remove the app from their app stores so that people don't have access to them. And so I think that this decision by TikTok to have a pop-up come up and say, this is what the ban entails, this is what you could do with your data, is really a nod toward the incoming administration and what Trump might be able to do to save this app. If Trump on day one, the ban takes place January 19th. Trump comes in January 20th. If Trump comes in on January 20th and saves the app, I think that will be a very strong signal for his administration, as well as TikTok's partnership with the incoming administration.
Now, this week, a lot of us were waiting for a decision from the Supreme Court, but while people have been waiting, a lot of folks have been flocking to other apps, especially RedNote, which is another Chinese app similar to TikTok, right?
That's right. RedNote is a Chinese app, and it's very interesting. A lot of these creators are basically saying, we don't care about the ties to China. And one of the creators said, wouldn't it be funny if we did this? And I think it just shows how the national security implications that the government has really been trying to hammer is not really resonating with a lot of these creators and some of the platform's users who will be quick to note that American companies are also collecting so much US data. So, they're flocking to RedNote. They're also flocking to Lemonade. Lemonade is another app that is owned by ByteDance. And so, again, the law very clearly says whether it's TikTok, whether it's Lemonade, any ByteDance subsidiary, it will be illegal to continue to have that platform and these apps on app stores. And it's even broader than that. This doesn't get talked about as much, but it goes after any foreign adversary controlled application. And so RedNote would also fall under that purview. If Apple and Google continue to carry that app, they might also get into some legal crosshairs.
All right, let's move on to our next headline, which is President Biden signing an executive order to bolster AI data center development. And so this happened on Tuesday. President Biden issued an executive order that would speed up the development of these AI data centers domestically, directing the Department of Defense as well as the Department of Energy to lease federal sites for these centers as well as for clean energy facilities. Now, this comes on the heels of the Biden administration unveiling AI export controls last week, which aims to ensure China doesn't gain access to U.S. tech through other allied nations. Maria, I know there's a lot here and you've been reporting on it. What does all of this mean for American AI innovation versus that of China's?
Yeah, the Biden administration is really busy here on their final days. So these two executive orders are meant to be seen as complementary. That's how the Biden administration is framing them. The AI data center executive order is meant to encourage companies to stay here in the US, to build data centers, and really meet this moment where if we're going to beat China in this global tech race, we need to create models here that require so much data. The export control executive order is meant to discourage this very powerful US technology from getting into the hands of China through third countries. And so it's export controls and regulations on basically the entire world, not on China necessarily. And it splits the world into three buckets: allied countries, where exports can continue to flow freely, non-allied countries, and then foreign adversaries. So it's a very big sweeping move, and we'll be watching how the incoming administration gets rid of, builds upon these moves.
Now, on the other side, many lawmakers are pretty wary about how all of this might impact the environmental areas, like the environmental consequences of having these data centers in the United States, because obviously they do eat up a lot of energy. So, are sort of some of the complications around that?
So, like you said, these data centers eat up a lot of energy. They also increase electricity bill costs for the people that are living in these areas. And what the Biden executive order does is it basically streamlines environmental permitting reviews and makes it easier to obtain a permit. And according to some Democratic lawmakers, environmental groups, and consumer advocacy groups, this will lead to harms to the environment and to consumers. It's important to note that the Biden administration tried to account for clean energy here. They said, these companies should look for clean energy resources when they're building these data centers. They should also avoid any harms to the environment as much as possible. And they have to pay for all of the construction so that consumers don't have to bear the brunt of those costs. But we have an incoming administration that might not be so keen to protect the environment and not keep these protections in place. It'll be interesting to see what Congress does in this area to really cement some of these things into law versus just an executive order.
All right, let's move on to our final headline, which is about Meta's CEO urging Trump to intervene on EU fines on tech firms. Now, Inauguration Day is just a couple of days away, 3 days away, and we're going to see Donald Trump become the 47th president. His election, of course, is coming with a lot of tech leaders, as you mentioned at the top, warming up to him, giving money to his inauguration and his transition. Among those leaders being Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg, who last week appeared on the Joe Rogan show and urged Trump to step in to protect American tech companies from the European Union's tech enforcement. Here's a clip of that video.
If the U.S. tech industry is going to continue being really strong, I do think that the U.S. government has a role in basically defending it abroad. And that's one of the things that I'm optimistic about will happen in this administration.
Now, Maria, how realistic is it for a U.S. president to tell other nations how they should regulate U.S. companies operating there?
There's realistic, and then there is Donald Trump, who we have seen in the past do very unique things. And what I thought was very interesting about that interview with Joe Rogan was that he likened the fines that these tech companies have faced in the EU to tariffs. And we know that tariffs are a tool that Trump likes to use and has used in the past against the European Union, allies as well as adversaries. So, it might be that is something some of these tech CEOs want to employ to kind of counter what they have been facing abroad in these regulations.
Now, you have folks like Republican Senator Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee, among others in the federal government, for example, who really just don't like what they're seeing right now, the tech CEOs being very close to Trump. How do you see this type of relationship, these frictions playing out during the administration?
Yeah. So, Zuckerberg in the coming weeks will be coming to Washington, D.C. reportedly. He'll be meeting with lawmakers. You mentioned Blackburn. She is someone who has really advocated for protecting kids online, which is another regulatory effort that impacts Meta directly. She is also a prominent conservative on the Hill who takes issue with censorship. So her dynamic with Zuckerberg is an interesting one. Clearly, his recent moves, whether it's getting rid of content moderators, getting rid of DEI programs, have not won favor with all conservatives in Washington, D.C. But, as he comes to the Hill, builds these relationships, we'll see how that unfolds and how successful he is.
Well, thank you so much to Maria Curie, who is with Axios. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And thanks to everyone for joining us for Marketplace Tech Bytes Week in Review. Jesus Alvarado produced this episode, and I'm Kimberly Adams.
This is APM.